Today we're going to answer a few questions for you guys. How do elite athletes peak at the right time? How do coaches manage the fatigue of athletes while still having them push the limits of human capability? Why simply mixing everything together doesn't work for advanced lifters and sprinters, and humans for all that matters. So, block periodization is all about focused adaptation, guys. Breaking the year into strategic blocks that build general abilities, convert them into sport specific power, and then sharpen an athlete for competition. Or for adults, we're even going to talk about how to use this for adults as well, how to sharpen them for whatever their goals. So it's rooted in decades of research from legends that we will go over. We're going to go over each of them. And so you'll know who did what. And it doesn't just apply to athletes. Like I said, we're going to show you today how it applies to adults as well. So let's get started. Let's dive in here. So the key principles of block periodization. Training is divided into focused blocks. So each block trains one primary physical quality at a time. So typical sequence would be accumulation, transmutation, realization. These are just made up names. I make up names as I go, but normally each of those stands for something. So the accumulation block, your goal is to increase general abilities like work capacity, basic strength, hypertrophy. It's going to be higher volume, lower intensity. It's a good time to develop any type of like VO2 max or any type of aerobic base for athletes. That's important too. And for you adults, it's a good time to start right away, the VO2 max. And so, because if you want to later develop more power, you're probably going to want to make sure you have a good solid VO2 max early, so that way we can maintain it and really shift our focus on power, which you'll find out about. The transmutation block, it's more sport-specific development. Now, none of these, by the way, it's not that each of these has to be 4 weeks or 6 weeks. Matter of fact, a lot of times here lately, accumulation has been 8, maybe even 12 weeks, because for Olympic athletes, you're talking about a 4-year process. So, like for Ryan Grimsland, luckily with USA Weightlifting, we have some good partners now. So I get to sit down with Sean Rigsby and even sometimes Mike Gattone, and we get to really think about things from a big point of view. And so getting all that feedback really helps. And so right now we're focusing on certain things like hypertrophy. We're trying to build a big strength deficit, meaning we want to build all this excess strength right now. So later on, we can focus on snatch, clean and jerk, the things that are important, more speed related. But anyway, so then transmutation, more moderate volume, exercises will become more specific. And then finally, the realization phase, that's the block where you're getting ready to compete. Or if you're an adult, maybe we're going to sharpen up some specific skills. We're really going to focus on power because power is important to longevity, which we'll go over. But anyway, you just don't want to do all of that at the same time. And so that might have been the weakness, I think, with the West Side Barbell is like they try to do everything at the same time. And it's just, for powerlifting, maybe that's okay because, your main thing is always going to be strength. And so with other team sports, not necessarily because, with team sports, let's say football, the goal is speed and power. You want to be strong for sure, but as you see nowadays, speed kills. And so if you want to focus on speed, you do need to take blocks to where that becomes a priority. And I'll show you why in just a few minutes. So things we're going to talk about, sequential development of qualities. Each block builds on the previous one. We're going to learn about residual training effects. It's the theory guides how long adaptations last. That's going to be the big one that maybe, West Side. Let me say before, I love West Side Barbell and I still use those concepts, but maybe not in the way that people think about it. But high concentration of stress, unlike concurrent training, block training emphasizes focused overload on one or two qualities, reduces conflicting adaptations. Trying to max strength and aerobic fitness at the same time might not be the best. Reduced interference, organizes training so certain qualities don't fight each other. So then clear and measurable goals per block. That's the key. That's the the thing that USA Weightlifting has really helped me with lately is making those things measurable. So KPIs, key performance indicators, but novices might do better with general forms. But now we're going to peak when it matters. Designed for athletes who hit peak performance at specific times. See, like powerlifters, maybe not so much powerlifters though, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But definitely weightlifters, throwers, sprinters, combat athletes, and team sport athletes. So what the research actually says, intensity versus volume. I want to go over this first before we go deeper because I want you to know why, I do certain things the way I do. But, if by killing people with volume, some people say, I don't want to go so heavy. So I'm really going to focus on volume. But all the research would say that it's harder to recover from high amounts of volume. So you're better off to just, go heavy, hit it, and go home. And so across strength, hypertrophy, and even speed power research, training volume is the biggest indicator of accumulated fatigue. So the more volume you do, the more you're going to accumulate that fatigue. And if you're in a strength sport, or especially like even weightlifting, it's if you're in that, you're talking about 6 lifts, and you're going as heavy as you can in those 6 lifts, and it's very power driven in weightlifting. Is it a good idea to do tons of volume, which might fatigue you and cause you to be slower? It's just, I'm not saying you don't want volume because you do need volume because you need to make sure you're going to create some type of adaptation. One of the ways is volume, but there's other ways as well. So more sets and reps equals more muscle damage. Higher metabolic stress equals a longer recovery window. So volume disrupts performance for 24 to 72 hours, which is exactly what Louis said, the 72 hours. But high volume work reduces force production and bar velocity for multiple days. So those are some of your research. It's the key is figuring out how much volume because you need it. You do need to create adaptations and getting that continuous overload. But by going heavy, I think there's a whole debate now, like where Dorian Yates is coming back into the world of bodybuilding, and he's all about one big set, whereas other people are saying more sets, but I don't know. Maybe it all works. It's like a happy medium. It's like how much can you recover from to get the optimal amount of, stimulus that will create that overload and tell the body, hey, you need to adapt to get bigger, stronger, faster, whatever. But um, 2, high intensity produces fatigue, but it's more neurological and it's short lived. So intensities of 90% plus, it hits you, then it's easier to recover from overall. Impacts the CNS, but not the muscles as much. Typically recover 24 to 48 hours. It causes less total muscle damage compared to high volume. So it produces more acute fatigue rather than that lingering systematic fatigue. So it's definitely a lot to think about here. Easier to recover from than high volume work, unless done excessively. Then you can beat yourself to death. So, keynotes: central fatigue dissipates faster than peripheral fatigue. 1 to 3 heavy singles or doubles have minimal muscle damage. Athletes often perform better in subsequent sessions, often after high intensity. Oh, I didn't mean, sorry. High intensity and low in volume sessions versus the opposite. So maybe there's something to be said about the Bulgarian method. I don't know. But just maybe not. They seem to have, when you're training 3 or 4 times a day, they're trying to throw it all in there. So I don't know. All I'm saying is this. Let me break it down to you. I'm not saying one is better. I'm saying be smart. If an athlete is feeling good, go heavy and stop, cut the volume. So then you can recover and do it again. That's all I'm saying. High velocity training, that's the easiest to recover from than all of these. And so that's from Brian Mann, Sukumel, and others. Some maximal loads moved fast. Low reps, low volume, minimal eccentric. You can do that. Now, the thing about that, when you're talking about power and speed, is that you can do it over and over. So you get better at certain things like jumping or like running. So this type of training has the lowest recovery cost. That's why speed strength work can appear multiple times per week without crushing an athlete. So you can do things like snatch, clean and jerk. The thing is when we're trying to do lots of squatting, lots of pulling, and lots of snatching, and lots of clean and jerking. That's the biggest thing that we're going to do differently in this next quad is no matter what the athlete thinks, we're going to, when you got a guy like Ryan Grimsland who can, squat 285 kilos, like it's almost 630 pounds, and he weighs, 165 pounds. Is it important for him to do a lot of squatting? No matter what he thinks, it's just in his head. So the most he's going to squat here soon will be on Mondays and Saturdays. And then we're going to focus on snatch and clean and jerk because he can recover. It's easy to recover from. And that is the sport. All right. So practical coaching hierarchy. What drains athletes most? From most fatiguing to the least fatiguing. High volume and moderate loads. That's you're doing that. Lots of volume at moderate to heavy loads. That's going to kill you. High volume at light loads. High volume power work. Jumps, bounding, plyos when volume is high. High intensity strength work. Low volume. High velocity speed work. Low volume. There you go. Another way to look at it, total work beats load on the bar when it comes to fatigue. This is why block periodization uses this principle. Block periodization is built on this exact resource. Accumulation block is heavy, it's harder to recover from. Then that's why we don't want to do a whole lot of technical work during those high volume times. Transmutation block becomes more moderate, or the intensity is rising, so it's manageable fatigue. Realization phase, it's low volume, high intensity. We can recover and we can keep doing it. So this is why athletes peak during realization. Makes sense. All right. Who came up with block periodization? This is debatable, but most of the research would say Matveyev. And then I'm going to show you a bunch of a lot of people have had, their influence on periodization. So he's the father of traditional linear periodization, high volume. Then he would go to low volume and low intensity, and then high intensity. So macro cycles, he came up with that macro, meso, the micro. The macro is the big picture. Normally like anywhere from 20 to a year to 4 years in our case in weightlifting. Mesocycle might be a month, anywhere between 2 to 6 weeks, and a micro would be that 1 week or 1 day or a few days, but works best for beginners and predictable seasons. Then Yuri Verkhoshansky, I think he's had the biggest input or influence. He's the father of the shock method, which we use a lot, even in weightlifting. Introduced concentrated load in blocks, delayed training effect and residual training effects. Laid the groundwork for modern block ideas. Concentrated loading, what is it? A period of training where you apply a very highly focused dose of stress to develop one primary physical qualities like max strength, like power, like special strength. So instead of spreading multiple qualities along a program like concurrent training, Verkhoshansky overloaded one system intensely for a short block. So what does it matter? Stronger, more targeted adaptations reduces interference between these competing qualities. Like, you don't want to be doing like the mile when you're trying to, hit your max 100-meter sprint. Prepare the body for the next block of training. It's sequential adaptations that will build on each other. He was very big on specificity as well. So delayed training effect, like what is it? It's like you do something and it takes a while before you actually see the results. So the idea is that the full adaptation from a concentrated loading block doesn't appear immediately. It might be a few weeks after that, which is often during a low fatigue or transitional phase. It doesn't matter. Athletes can feel worse during a high load block. Performance improvements emerge after the body recovers. That's why we taper. This led Issurin to formalize transmutation and realization blocks. Residual training effects. What are they? How long a special physical quality remains elevated after you finish training it. So Verkhoshansky showed that different qualities decay at different rates, so which allows coaches to plan training blocks so qualities don't drop off. So like aerobic endurance, it can last up to 30 days. Max strength 30 days. That's why we're trying to build this huge, max strength like base, so we can do very little to maintain it too. Anaerobic glycolytic capacity, that's about 18 days. Doesn't last as long. Speed strength, even less. So for weightlifters, they got to keep doing weightlifting. And max speed, 5 days. So you got to be moving at high amounts of max speed, whatever your sport is. It needs to resemble whatever it is because after 5 days it goes away. So that's why sprinting, you got to sprint. Um, why does it matter? Strength lasts a long time. Doesn't need a lot of exposure. Speed dies quickly, so you got to focus on it. It helps determine the order of training blocks. Prevents losing gains while building new qualities. So the principle is core to block periodization sequencing. Greater specificity and transfer. So what is it? Verkhoshansky emphasized designing exercises that have a high degree of biomechanical, neural, and energetic similarities to the sport. So like you want to be moving at the same velocity, you want to be moving at the same direction, you want to be moving, at the same amount of fatigue that you're going to be doing it when you compete. That's important. This influences Bondarchuk and Issurin. So the closer an exercise matches the demands, the greater the neural transfer, the greater the technical transfer. The more likely it's going to improve the sport. Example: depth jump has high transfers to sprinting than a leg press does, of course. Stretch shortening cycle, high eccentric braking, high rate of force development, neural pattern, that elastic energy reuse. So if you want to get faster at sprinting, you got to really do the things that make sprinting good, which is when the foot strikes the ground, that elastic energy is displaced very quickly at a very fast rate down the track. So it needs to be at the same speed, same types of movement. Verkhoshansky's work pushed coaches to distinguish general versus special versus specific strength. All right. Now we're talking about Bondarchuk. Transfer training. He was the pioneer. He talked about GPE, SPE, STE, and CE. Individual adaptation cycles, sport specific periodization. So GPE, what is that? It's general preparatory exercises. Exercises that develop those general qualities. So it's build a foundational base, work capacity, general strength. This is where you're going to get your back squat, deadlift. This is where we're at with Ryan right now. General core. If you need conditioning, now's the time. The transfer to your sport is going to be low, but that's the base that you're going to build on. SPE definition: exercises that train muscles and movements patterns similar to the sport, but not they don't necessarily replicate the competitive movements like speed, rhythm, or structure. They develop the physical qualities needed for the sport, not the technical model. So purpose is to bridge the gap between general strength and sport specific strength, improves the main muscle groups involved in competition. Example: deadlifts for throwers, hip thrusts for sprinters, kettlebell swings for jumpers, pulling blocks for rowers. Transfer to sport is moderate at this point. Now, specialized development exercises. So this is exercises that replicate the key elements of the competitive movement in terms of muscles used, force production, the velocity, the movement pattern, the rhythm and timing, but they're still not the competitive movement itself. Purpose: develop sport-specific strength and competition speeds, reinforce neuromuscular firing sequences, create high transfer to performance. Examples would be shot put drills with slightly heavier or lighter implements, sprint sled pulls that are light load for sprinters, jump takeoff drills, matching event mechanics, hammer winds with a modified hammer. So there you go. By the way, yeah, we went over that. So transfer to sports very high. SD is where gains translate most directly to sport performance. Competitive exercises. Now it's time to get right. For weightlifters, it's snatch, clean, and jerk. For the hammer throwers, it's throwing a hammer. For sprinting, it's sprinting. It's doing your thing. Transfer sport is very high. So, but you can't do this all the time, or eventually you break down. The thing about sprinters, for example, when they are actually ready to set world records or to set their PRs, they're also at a very very close to being hurt because they're moving at speeds the body is not really meant to do. So they're very elastic. Their tendons are incredibly strong, that's a good time when they tear a lot of muscles. So you got to be very wise in when you peak and how long that peak stays, and then getting off that peak. How the categories work together. Bondarchuk uses these classifications to build training cycles. GPE builds the base. SPE builds sport-specific strength. SDE builds sport-specific power and technique integration. Finally, the competitive exercises ties everything together in peak form. We do the exact same thing for weightlifting. Finally, Vladimir Issurin, that's from the 1990s to 2000s, creator of block periodization, accumulation, transmutation, realization, high concentration, targeted loading, built for elite athletes. Now, lately, modern periodization, we've started using things like velocity-based training, autoregulation, readiness-based training, microdose speed and power, the high, low CNS organization, and then hybrid blocks, concurrent systems. So here are some block examples. Like for examples, blocks 1 and 2. You might want to. This is where it's a good thing to really work on general strength, hypertrophy, gain some muscle, joint stability, like the spring ankle by my man Cal Dietz at the University of Minnesota. Really getting the ankle and the knee and the hip really those joints super stable. So when the foot strikes the ground at a very specific angle, all that energy is displaced in the direction you want it to go. If there's weakness in the foot, the ankle, the knee, or the hips, some of that energy is going to be lost. We don't want any of that. So, example, the dip of a jerk too, like stabilizing the angles of the ankle, the knee, and the hips, and the entire back. When you're doing a jerk for a clean and jerk, maybe even a split position, perfecting that position, anti-rotation. If you're one of those people like Ryan used to rotate, it's a time to stabilize all of those things. Joint angle specific, you might want to you really target specific angles of the joints and like maxing out certain velocities at certain joint angles. Adults might be a very good time to really work on the VO2 max base, strength, and hypertrophy. You can do those together. Not necessarily strength, but like hypertrophy. You start to build some muscle, start to slowly build that conditioning base level. Movement and skill, you can start to work on certain movement patterns. It's a good time to test and start understanding fatigue zones for velocity. Block 2, you might want to start doing some, for athletic performance athletes, you might want to do some power cleans, basic jumps, some acceleration training. Olympic lifters might start doing partial movements, some jumps, percentages of comp lifts for max velocity at certain angles. Adults might want to really turn up the VO2 max. They might want to start doing a little bit more of the strength work, finish out the hypertrophy work, and start to slowly do more skills. Block 3, at that point, the adults can at that point start to really peak your VO2 max. Now start to really work on power and strength. And for the Olympic lifters, now we're focusing snatch and clean and jerk, less squatting. Only going to do 2 times at most, especially for strong athletes, maybe once, depends. Athletic performance, time to transition, to really work on the transition phase of sprinting, concurrent training, Olympic lifts, depth and drop jumps. See how it just shifts. So that's it. That's the block periodization. That's how it all started. Gives you little highlights of each. It's going to be very different depending on the sport, So, but I've given you some examples of each. So, if you guys need me, Travis at Rise Indoor Sports. Check us out, riseindoorsports.com, masterlead.com. That's my cell phone. Here's your citations. Here's some velocity-based training. There's you can just go to masterlead.com. All of this stuff is there now. So, anyway, thanks, guys.